It has become clear to me over the years that what many call empathy is not always the benign gift it appears to be. Often, it conceals deeper patterns, complex, hidden entanglements of the psyche. What follows are not conclusions, but observations, quiet truths, arrived at through years of listening, not only to patients, but to the deeper symbols beneath their stories. In some individuals, there is a peculiar pattern, a kind of inner dissolution that occurs whenever they become close to another. They do not merely relate, they absorb, and in this absorption, they lose themselves entirely. The boundary between I and thou collapses. This is often mistaken for love, but true love requires a strong center, a firm sense of self that can meet the other without being consumed by them. I have seen this merging tendency most often in those who have, since childhood, been trained, not explicitly but through circumstance, to monitor the emotional climate around them. These individuals learn to attune not out of choice but out of necessity. Their survival depended on it, and so as adults they mistake entanglement for intimacy. They imagine that to feel everything another feels is a sign of depth, when in truth it may be a sign of unexamined wounds. To feel deeply is not wrong, but without the strength to remain rooted in oneself, such a feeling becomes a burden, one that eventually leads not to union, but to exhaustion. It is an uncomfortable thing to admit, but empathy is not always as innocent as it appears. In fact, I have often observed that behind the most sensitive and outwardly selfless personalities, there exists an unconscious will to control, not through domination, but through emotional mastery. An empath, by tuning so finely into another's emotions, can begin to manipulate the environment without ever intending to. They anticipate needs before they are voiced. They soothe tension before it is named. But in doing so, they quietly condition the world around them to respond in ways that feel safe. This is not malicious. It is not even conscious, but it is control nonetheless, disguised as compassion. You see, the one who is always adjusting themselves to maintain harmony is also subtly shaping reality to avoid dissonance. And in avoiding dissonance, they also avoid truth, their own truth and the truth of others. This creates a situation where no one is fully honest. The empath fears conflict, so they preempt it. They fear rejection, so they give too much. And slowly, those around them begin to behave not as they truly are, but as the empath needs them to be. In order to maintain the fragile peace, empathy without boundaries, I have found, often becomes the most insidious form of control, not through force, but through subtle emotional choreography. I have long maintained that the psyche is not random. It is deeply symbolic, and the relationships we form are rarely as accidental as they appear. For the empath, this symbolic magnetism takes on a particularly perilous form. The empath is often unconsciously drawn to what I call the wounded archetype, the addict, the narcissist, the perpetual victim. These individuals represent not only others in need, but also unacknowledged parts of the empath's own psyche. The reason is simple. The empath sees themselves as the healer, the redeemer, the one who can endure and fix, and so, without realizing it, they seek out the broken as a way of proving their worth. But this dynamic is a trap, a psychological mirror. The wounded other is not a project to be saved, it is a reflection, and the empath's compulsive need to fix is not love, it is avoidance. It is an attempt to escape their own hidden wounds by pouring energy into someone else's chaos. And what results is a draining cycle. The empath gives and gives, the wounded partner takes and takes, and both remain trapped, one in the illusion of saving, the other in the illusion of being saved. This, I must stress, is not compassion. It is codependency masquerading as spiritual purpose. True healing begins when the empath turns inward and asks, why do I need them to be broken in order to feel whole? Many who are called empaths pride themselves on their openness, on their ability to feel everything, to sense shifts in mood, to absorb emotional undercurrents like a sponge. But what they often fail to see is this: when sensitivity is not coupled with structure, it leads to dissolution of the self. I observed this frequently in my clinical work. Individuals who identified deeply with the suffering of others but had no discernible center of gravity within themselves. They could tell you how others felt. They could describe the emotional atmosphere of a room, but ask them what they needed, what they believed, and you would be met with silence or confusion. You see, it is one thing to be perceptive, it is another to become porous. The unconscious does not reward martyrdom, it punishes it, slowly and then all at once. The empath who lacks boundaries becomes a hollow vessel, used by others, confused by their own inner contradictions, and eventually resentful that no one sees the toll it takes. But it was never their job to carry the world's sorrow. That is the hidden arrogance of the empath. The belief that they alone are meant to feel it all. There is no virtue in drowning just because others refuse to learn how to swim. If you do not define the edge of your soul, others will, and they will do so for their own benefit, not yours. This is the final truth many empaths refuse to face, and yet it is the most vital. Behind the empath's kindness, behind their endless patience and emotional attunement, lies something they rarely acknowledge: an immense buried rage, a rage born not of cruelty, but of chronic self-abandonment. I have said before that the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It gathers force, it thickens, and in those who chronically suppress their own needs for the sake of others, the shadow becomes feral. The empath may see themselves as endlessly understanding, but their unconscious is keeping score. Every time they say yes when they mean no, every time they absorb pain that is not theirs, every time they give comfort while quietly disintegrating. And eventually the psyche rebels. It starts subtly: resentment, irritability, fatigue, but it deepens, and if left unexamined, it becomes a kind of psychic violence, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, or in some cases, sudden outbursts that shock even themselves. Do not mistake this for weakness. The empath's rage is not weakness. It is the scream of a soul that has been ignored too long, even by its own self. The tragedy is that most empaths never turn toward it. They fear what they might find. But what they do not realize is this: if you do not claim your shadow, it will claim you. And then even your compassion becomes a mask for control, and your love a strategy for survival. I have often said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But there is a particular tragedy I have witnessed in those who are labeled as empaths. You see, society romanticizes them. It calls them healers, angels, light bearers. And while there is some truth to their sensitivity, what is rarely understood, what is nearly never spoken aloud, is the origin of this so-called gift. For many, empathy is not an innate virtue, but a scar, a wound so deep It has altered the very structure of the personality. The empath is often not born, but made in the crucible of emotional unpredictability, in homes where silence was louder than screams, where the slightest shift in someone's tone or breath meant danger, withdrawal, or abandonment. These people learned to scan the emotional weather of a room, not for curiosity, but for survival. Their nervous system became a radar. Their heart became a translator of unspoken moods, hidden resentments, and erupting tempers. And so they grew, hyper-attuned to others and quietly divorced from themselves. When I worked with such individuals in analysis, I noticed something peculiar. They could tell me exactly how their partner felt, how their friend was struggling, how their parent had suffered. But when asked how they felt, there was often a pause, a confusion, sometimes even tears, because no one had ever asked. More importantly, because they had never learned how to ask themselves. You see, the tragedy of unconscious empathy is not its presence, but its imbalance. Empathy without boundaries is self-erasure. It is a slow dissolution of the ego under the weight of others' needs. And ironically, while the empath may feel noble or even spiritually superior, this lack of self is not enlightenment, it is enmeshment. What is unconscious will always rule our lives until we make it conscious. And so the empath finds themselves exhausted, drained, confused why their relationships often tilt into codependence, or why they attract the very people who wound them. The narcissist, the manipulator, the perpetual victim. These are not random encounters. They are psychological mirrors, returning the empath to the scene of their original abandonment, offering them unconsciously a second chance to fix what was never their fault. But healing does not come through repetition, it comes through revelation. The empath must understand that their sensitivity is not inherently pure. It is a tool, but one that can be misused, especially when wielded unconsciously. Feeling deeply is not a license to merge with everything. Caring is not the same as rescuing. Understanding is not the same as tolerating harm. There comes a time when the empath must ask, where did I learn that my presence should be soothing? Who taught me that my job was to regulate everyone else's discomfort? And when did I begin to believe that loving others required abandoning myself? These are not easy questions. They provoke guilt, resistance, even grief, because to face them is to mourn a self that was never allowed to fully form. To admit that love for the empath often meant silence, compliance, shrinking to maintain the illusion of peace. But peace without authenticity is not peace, it is paralysis. The work then is not to become less sensitive, but to become more sovereign. A sovereign empath does not absorb emotions like a sponge. They observe them like a mirror. They feel, but they also discern. They recognize that their energy is a resource, not an obligation. They choose when to give, how much, and to whom. This is the alchemy of psychological maturity. I have watched this transformation unfold in analysis. It begins quietly. The empath stops apologizing. They start saying no, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They take longer to reply. They rest without explaining. They detach without guilt. And slowly, something incredible happens. They begin to hear their own voice again, a voice that was always there beneath the static of everyone else's expectations. That voice is the true self. The self I have written of so often. It does not shout, it does not demand, it simply waits for the day the individual becomes quiet enough, still enough, courageous enough to listen. So if you find yourself exhausted by the needs of others, if your kindness has become a currency that is never reciprocated, if you suspect that your empathy has turned against you, then it may be time to reclaim what was lost, not by hardening, not by becoming cruel, but by becoming conscious of your patterns, conscious of your origin story, and conscious of the simple truth that you too deserve to take up space in your own life. It is not selfish to heal. It is not selfish to have limits. It is not selfish to be whole. Do not let the world convince you otherwise. I do not share these thoughts to diminish the empath, nor to romanticize their pain. I speak only from what I have seen again and again in the depths of the psyche. The empath is not simply a sensitive soul. They are often the child who had to feel everything in order to survive, who developed radar for danger and disguised it as intuition, who learned to merge with others because their own self was never safe to be. What I ask, what I have always asked, is that we stop labeling these dynamics as virtuous simply because they look gentle. The path of individuation is not about being nice, it is about being whole, and wholeness requires confrontation with one's false self, with one's unmet needs, with the painful truth that much of what we call empathy is sometimes a fear of being disliked, abandoned, or exposed. But it is in that confrontation that the true gift of the empath can emerge, not as a martyr, not as a sponge, but as a clear, embodied presence who feels deeply, yes, but who also knows their boundaries, who chooses connection, not compulsion, and who loves not from emptiness, but from fullness. That is when empathy becomes a force of transformation, not just for others, but finally for the self.